let him introduce himself.
Hi everyone, very nice to do this author chat with you. Yes, I'll just tell you briefly my books. There's four genres. There's the crime thrillers, Stitch Up, Killer or Victim, which is there. There's my previous crime thriller, which was Triple T's, which was also a murder investigation. This one was searching for a serial killer, and it emulated from a short story, which I developed. Then, of course, the different genre altogether, My Life with the Stars, Sizzling Secrets Spilled is the second edition. It's got extra chapters to the first edition, been updated, and I think it's also cheaper than the first edition, so it's a better buy. And that's got interviews with people I've met as a journalist or as controller of information at Sky Television. Also people I've written about, so there's a whole list of people from Joan Collins and Eric Morecambe to Elvis Presley, Frank Sinatra, George Best, Muhammad Ali. I haven't interviewed all of them, but I've interviewed people who've worked with them or been upset by them or been really enamored by them in the business. You know, they've worked in the business. Then there's the fantasy adventure I did, Jodie Richards and Secret Potion, which is basically for Harry Potter fans. It has been compared with those who are seeking more magic after the Harry Potter books, and it is primarily for children and younger adults, but has also been liked by a lot of parents and older people, just like the Harry Potter books. And then lastly, there's various books of short stories, which I haven't written them all, but I've been involved. I mean, in this one, Twists in the Towers by the Not Dead Yet writers, of which I'm just about surviving as one of them. This has got two of my short stories, two of my wife Heather Flood's short stories. She has gone on to write longer stories about, fantasy adventure, basically. Mousy Mousy series for younger children. And then she's written Purple Mist for older children and adults. So that's basically it in a nutshell.
I'm really glad that we've got you on today. Do you want to tell people a little bit about all the troubles that we had?
Oh, yes, that was amazing. Caroline was so patient. I came on originally, and I didn't realise that she was going to give me carte blanche to speak for about 3.5 minutes or 4 minutes. I thought she was going to ask me some questions, and I'd had a migraine that day, and so when I was trying to do 3.5 to 4 minutes, I kept doing ums and ahs. So I thought, this is disastrous. So I asked her in an email if we could do it again, and she kindly said, yes, let's do it again. You wouldn't realise how the gremlins got into the works. It must have frozen the page with me speaking for less than 2 minutes, probably, suddenly froze. Now, Caroline suggested that she suggested that I went through Google instead of through Facebook to link up. But I also had a hunch that it might be my laptop, which was very slow and had a couple of problems with it. So I splashed out on a new laptop and also took her advice and went through Google. In the meantime, she'd very kindly edited together the two minutes that had survived with the original 1.5 minutes at the rear end and put the Gremlins sign up. But then when we did one last test for tonight, because we didn't want to just come on live tonight and find to our horror that it froze again, we did it as a dummy run and it came out. So after all that, I mean, she was a godsend, and she actually went and sent to me and my wife Heather, who helped out to try and solve the problem. She went and said how patient we were, but she deserves the medal because she was patience personified. And obviously, anybody who's a member of this group, when you've got somebody like Caroline who puts you at their ease and really goes out of their way to help you, not only by showing patience and time with you, but also advising you and helping you. I mean, she and David, they're the people I've met the most. They are really fantastic people to have at the head of an organisation.
Oh, thanks, Tony. I didn't mean you to say all of that.
Have I made you blush?
No.
I can't see
it. Let's start with the question that came in on the stream from your friend John.
What? Sorry.
He asked you, did John, he said he greatly enjoyed reading your crime thrillers. How did you develop the ideas for the 2 books? And are the characters from your imagination or people you know?
All right. Well, the first one, Triple T's, it developed from a short story. I'd written this short story, which was basically about this girl called Helen. I later, when I wrote the Triple T's, changed her name to Katrina. But in the short story, she was walking across a deserted car park following taking a lesson. She was one of the teachers at this college, so she was walking along the deserted car park, gets to the car, and suddenly this guy comes up from almost nowhere and says, can she help him? His car's broken down, he's just taken a lesson with another teacher, and he's got this train to catch and he's going to miss it. Could she be kind enough just to run him to the station? So she agrees. No sooner has he got in the car than he says to her, never mind the lift, we're going to have sex together, and gets out a knife and tells her to undo her blouse, which she does, and he fondles her breast. Doesn't see that a hand moves to the side department of the car, in which he's boasting to her, I've been waiting for you, girlie. I've seen you come out late a couple of times. What an idiot you are. And she says, well, I've been waiting for you, actually. You're the bastard who assaulted my sister in the same car park, aren't you? She's been so traumatized, she's never hardly been able to venture out since. And you've got what's coming to you. And she brings out the gun, and he says, oh, don't be stupid. You're never going to use that. Blood will go all over the car. You'll never get away with it. She says, it's not my car, it's one of the students. So he said, well, don't be so stupid. You're just going to go to the police and it'll be your word against mine. And so she said, as I said to you, the police won't come into it. So he goaded her a bit, and she said, and just as he was in mid-sentence, she fired the gun and he was no longer in existence. So that was the short story. And I thought, well, if I developed this and the police start to investigate her, and she, realizing that this DCI Livermore, this plagued policeman, is now investigating a serial killer, and he's got a suspect who's got off the hook so far. If she tries to do a deal with him by offering to be the bait in a honey trap, maybe that would be a really good start to a crime thriller. So that's how Triple T's came into being. As far as what John says about the characters, I suppose in the main I've written the plot or a lot of the plot first and developed the characters as I've gone along. I suppose the Jodie Richards and the Secret Potion, slightly different, developing characters like goblins and fairies and evil wizards, good wizards, and possibly the world's worst monster. Probably I did the opposite there and developed the characters before the story was finished.
Do you just invent the characters, or do you base them on people that you know?
I suppose I've based partly on people I've come across. I suppose when I'm on, not necessarily the characters' characterizations, but their looks. And when I say I know, I suppose I'm exaggerating. Really, I don't know them. I used to see them on the underground or on trains or in a corridor or study them in a doctor's surgery. Or even a restaurant, if they looked a bit different, if they looked somebody who stood out, and I would develop them as their characteristics, as sorry, their looks as my characters. As far as characteristics are concerned, I did do sketching out and looking into characteristics, and obviously you try to not just give people's good points, but you try to give them faults as well, to make them more realistic. And so that's basically how they've come about.
What was the first thing that you wrote then? What made you start writing?
I suppose the first thing I wrote was the Jodie Richards Secret Potion. My wife Heather, as I said, is a fellow author. She gave me the idea for this young girl whose brother is kidnapped by this evil wizard, and she, the young girl Jodie, dreams herself into this magical island where nothing is quite as it seems, and that took off. And the publisher, when he came to see us, and we got talking about the fact that I was a journalist and former Sky TV executive, and I'd met quite a lot of famous people, he pressured me into writing a book about it, My Life with the Stars. So that's how it all started off, with those two books, really, both completely different genres, and nothing, of course, similar to the crime thrillers I've written more recently.
So my next question that he sent me as a message while I was at his house earlier.
All right.
I remember. He said he wanted to know if you've ever been in the Thomas the Becket pub.
I think I probably have a couple, a long while ago. Quite wonderful atmosphere there, isn't there? I mean, I used to live in a pub when I was younger. My grandparents had a pub in Woolwich called the Lord Clyde, and that brought happy memories. And my grandfather was quite generous, and I used to be able to help myself to lemonade for nothing and crisps and things. It also brought back quite a lot of fun times. I mean, as I said, it was called the Lord Clyde, and my grandfather, like some people I've come across since, used to put on a telephone voice, and when he answered the phone, he used to say, "Lord Clyde here." And once somebody said, "Oh, sorry, Your Lordship, I got the wrong number." So it was quite good days, those.
There's a load of questions coming in. Someone asked how long it took you to write your first novel.
The Secret Potion probably took a year, and that developed as I went along. I didn't spend every day on it, but I did try to do it regularly. My Life with the Stars was easier because it was true stories, but it was a question of trying to remember them. I hadn't deliberately kept a diary or tried to reminisce about these people, so that took longer. I mean, you mentioned John Newton. I see in our UK crime writers, he's put up a post about the fact about how important research is, and of course I did spend a hell of a lot of time on research, particularly on the crime writers, and buttonholed two former Metropolitan Police officers and questioned them profusely, because I I found that lots of books, and this is another thing that inspired me to write crime thrillers, lots of books are extremely good, but others you think to yourself, well, that's not very plausible. I'm sure I could do a better job than that. Or you think, it lacks credibility. And you often see these things, don't you, on television where there's a car chase that wreaks so much damage, it's unbelievable. The person of the crime they're pursuing is minor compared with the damage they've wrecked with hundreds of thousands of pounds on cars they've completely written off, bridges they've blown up, etc., etc. So I've always thought it should be creditable. But getting back to what John was saying, he was saying on a post on our club that when he wrote White Sunrise, he took an enormous amount of time to research it. And one chapter took him 6 months because of the vast amount of research he'd done. And then because he was being such a perfectionist, he decided not to use that chapter after all. So I would agree with him that research, extensive research is essential. But obviously, if you're lucky enough to have a publisher or an agent, you can't afford to spend too much time on research, otherwise you're going to miss your publishing deadline. No book. Loads of research, no book.
Tell us a little bit about your career then, because you've had a really long and interesting career.
Yeah, I started off with the Lewisham Borough News, a local paper, and then eventually went to work in Fleet Street on the Sunday People, and did shifts on the News of the World and other papers on a Saturday, because national papers, Sunday papers, obviously I was working in the sports department as a sub-editor, and obviously on a Saturday when there's football and cricket matches, and they've got very little time to turn things round from the time the football matches end to going to press. They need extra staff, so I used to go in and help them. Then I got this job as controller of information at Sky Television, where basically I was in charge of publicity for Eurosport, and did lots of interviews with famous people that they had on, and sent these stories out to regional and national newspapers to try and get publicity, and offering Sky dishes as prizes, even though the Sky dishes weren't the most expensive item in the world. They captured the imagination. People liked the idea of winning a Sky dish. And so I'd also, as their public relations person, I'd also contact people like the Park Lane Hotel and get them to give 2 nights free dinner, bed and breakfast for our lucky winners. So that was the sort of thing I was doing for them. But that was completely different in a way from actually doing hard news and investigating things as a reporter and later as an editor. I also was editor of Football Monthly, Britain's oldest football magazine, and that was great fun because it was competing with IPC magazines, to which vast amounts of money were put in, and we did things on a much tighter budget. And I came up with the idea of giving awards to ITV's commentator, well, not necessarily ITV's, but Television Commentator of the Year, Television Sports Reporter of the Year. And then I'd phone up after, well, I mean, we genuinely gave it to who we thought deserved it, but having worked out who should be deserving of it, we'd then phone up the television company, say ITV, for example, tell them that their sports commentator had won our award, and on some occasions they'd give us 3 minutes live on air to present the award, which if that had been in an advertisement, in advertising terms, that would have cost us countless thousands, which of course we didn't have. And then, to my shame, I worked for the notorious Sunday Sport, which was looked upon as a bit of a joke. But from nowhere, Sunday Sport came up with a circulation of over 400,000, which was a hell of an achievement. And the staff of Sunday Sport were encouraged by the management to phone up radio stations and complain, as if we were members of the public, about just how terrible Sunday Sport was and how shameful the stories was. I mean, there were stories like a woman 60 years of age gives birth to old age pensioner and things like that. So we'd complain and say how horrible it was, and people naturally, by human nature, they want to buy the paper just to see for themselves. So that's how it got on. But the one redeeming thing, big redeeming thing, when I was in charge of sport on Sunday Sport, was that I got all these famous personalities to write columns for us or write match reports. And we recruited Bobby Moore, our World Cup winning captain, a sports editor under me as head of sport. And the amazing thing about Bobby Moore was that when he won the World Cup for England, he was so decisive, and he was adored throughout the world. And as I say, very, very decisive and able to come to a decision very, very quickly. But in real life, that wasn't really the case. And he often used to sit on the fence, whereas Sunday Sport wanted people to come down on one side or the other. So what I'd do with him, I'd sit patiently and make a list of all the pros that he came up with, and then on the other side, a list of all the cons he came up with, and which whatever one was the highest number, that was his firm opinion in Sunday Sport. It was a tragedy, really, that nobody in football really gave him a decent job after he led England to the World Cup. And today, of course, you've got players who former players who become ambassadors for clubs and still continue to earn big money, whereas he, of course, didn't have that privilege at all.
So you're a big sports fan?
Yes, I suppose I am. Of course, in my life with the Stars, I also write about footballers and boxers, and how I met George Best and played football with him, how I interviewed Muhammad Ali, how I interviewed Frank Bruno, etc., etc. And George Best, I mean, I played in a charity football match with him once, and the Charlton manager, because this charity football match was in aid of a Charlton player, testimonial match, said in his programme afterwards, the thing I'll never forget is sports writer Tony Flood. Everywhere George Best went, so Tony Flood went. The only problem was they were both on the same team. That's how much in awe I was of George Best. But of course, not so much in awe of him as women who adored him. And even Barbara Windsor admitted to having a magical moment with him.
You have a really good story in your celebrity memoirs book about someone who gave you something for George Best, isn't there?
Oh yes, this lady, this gorgeous blonde. We were in a hotel. I was on the committee of the Sports Writers Association, and it was our annual dinner. I think it was the annual dinner. It was certainly one of our big events, and I was talking to George Best in a VIP area, and this blonde who couldn't get to him because, as I say, it was roped off. She gave him this very fetching smile, and then when I needed to go to the gents' loo, who should come out of the ladies' loo, or perhaps she was just deliberately waiting for me. She'd seen that I was with George Best, and she said, "Can you give this to George?" And she slipped something into my hand, which turned out to be her G-string wrapped in a room key. She said, "Tell him it's from the blonde he smiled at." And when I gave it to George, he just laughed his head off and said this sort of thing was always happening to him. And that's the thing, really, because lots of people have criticised George Best and Muhammad Ali, where a very similar thing happened, slightly different scenario, but similar thing happened, which I witnessed with Muhammad Ali. But when you think of the amount of temptation that was put in their way, although it was very wrong of them to be unfaithful, I don't think many sportsmen, particularly in that era, was so sorely tempted as the two.
There's a question from Samantha Brownlee on the stream, who's our other author chat lady, and she likes to ask this question. She said, what's your most memorable moments as an author so far?
Memorable moments? Well, I suppose meeting some of those people, really, and winning a few minor awards, and not just meeting famous people or world famous people. I mean, when I interviewed June Whitfield or asked her questions for the book, she was such a sweet person. I mean, the most charismatic people I've met, as I've probably already referred to, is George Best and Muhammad Ali. But there's been other people like June Whitfield and people like that who have been so generous in the time they've given and really nice, down-to-earth people. And Dec Kluski of The Bachelors, now there's a name that probably a lot of people won't remember. He got the ability to light up a room. In their day, The Bachelors were more famous and more successful and selling more records than the Beatles. But today, anybody under the age of 35 probably struggled to know who The Bachelors were. So seeing people come and go, it's amazing. But there's been so many people who have helped out and given endorsements, you know, like Al Murray, the comedian, and Brian Capron, who was the serial killer in Coronation Street, and all sorts of people who've given up their time to give helpful endorsements, and that's been gratifying as an author to meet these people.
You told me in one of our many attempts we had at filming a promo, as a broadcaster, you had some really good tips for like press releases and things for authors.
Ah, yes. Well, I thought it might be helpful, seeing as I was a journalist and, of course, a public relations officer. So I've written them out. So I'll just quickly read them to you if it will help fellow members. Press releases are the best vehicle, in my opinion. And in a press release, I'm saying here, you should call yourself a local author. Send press releases not just to where you live now, but also to where you have lived previously. And although this doesn't always work, I mean, Gillian Godden and I tried to do something for her along these lines. And I don't think, I mean, one guy said, editor of a paper, who wasn't where she lives now in Hull. This was down south where she used to live. He said, sorry, Tony, can't help on this occasion. I'm under pressure to put local people in and can't do something about somebody who lives 250 miles away. But in other instances, it's a numbers game. So if you keep doing it, there are going to be papers who are going to, if you've got the time to do it, there's going to be papers who say, yeah, that's great. I used to live in this area. Also, of course, send it to towns in which the book is set. So if your book is set in Colchester, and there's a couple of well-known places that you pointed out in your book that are in Colchester, send it to them. The angle of the press release is so important. It can be one about you, the author, as long as it's something original about yourself and interesting. You've got to make yourself stand out from other authors. 2, it could be about the plot of the book. 3, if the book makes a moral or social point, then you could have as the angle the point the book is referring to. And D, it could be linked to a well-known occurrence or anniversary. If you've written something which concurs with a national anniversary of the Battle of Britain or some other such thing, then that would be ideal time, 3 or 4 weeks beforehand, to bring it out. You need to use an attention-grabbing headline on your press release, because obviously the editors or sub-editors are looking at things very quickly. So you've got to make the headline that's going to grab their attention. Another thing you could do is free offers. Now, you might not be able to afford to go and give all your books away, but you might be able to afford, for example, to, if you've got 2 books, to offer a buy one, get one free. Now, that is better in some cases, perhaps many cases, than offering reduced prices, because the word free is very emotive, not only to readers, but also to editors. So if you're able to say something is free, that's a very good word to use. Or alternatively, if you can't afford to give one away free, just offer the editor 6 books or 5 books free as prizes in a competition. Some newspapers, regional newspapers, will say no, others will bite your arm off for it. The other thing that's important is to send your email to individual members of editorial staff. You can look them up on Google, send to more than one member of staff, because one of them may no longer work there. So just because their name's on Google and their email address is on Google, they might have left 4 weeks ago. So send it to 2 or 3. If you can't find individual members of staff, then just send it to their editorial address. And lastly, which may seem obvious, but some people don't do it, is attach a picture of you with your book, and also attach a separate picture of the image of the front cover. Give them a choice. It's always a good thing to give newspapers a choice. So I think that's very important. Also, when you're doing social media, I think you, Caroline, are very knowledgeable about social media, and I think a lot of us already are. But I think it's amazing how some people go and refer to their book as it or the book, and they miss the opportunity to repeat the name of their book. Or sometimes I've even seen some people, not members of UK crime writers, but other authors, I've actually seen them put up a thing on Facebook without once mentioning the name of their book, which is missing a golden opportunity, I think. I mean, it's a very fine balancing line, isn't it? You don't want to go and upset your friends and contacts by going on about your book too much. On the other hand, you need to go to get the message across in a gentle way to help them, to encourage them to share it. So it's a fine balancing act.
Right, I'm going to ask you some more questions off the stream now. Samantha says her daughter has asked if you're inspired by any authors from your childhood.
I don't know about, I suppose Charles Dickens, some of his stuff has appealed to me. And of course, Mr. Micawber with the famous line about, I can't remember the exact quote, but it's income £20, outgoings £19, £19 and sixpence, bliss, income £20, outgoing £20 and sixpence, disaster. So there's some excellent characters written by people in the past, and some excellent quotes there, and of course stories like the Lord Mayors of London mentioned in pantomimes, Dick Whittington. They're quite interesting characters as well, because they're based on real people.
Do you read a lot of crime books?
Yeah, I like a lot of. I like Peter James. I suppose the fact that he gave me an endorsement and recommended Triple T's probably puts me very much in a favourable mood with Peter James. But I do think his books are very, very good. And I also enjoy Lee Childs and other people of that ilk, and Jeffrey Archer. But the thing is that because they write so many books, they do slip up occasionally. Lee Childs, I remember one of his books I found very disappointing. As far as Peter James is concerned, some of his books have gone on to be, they're so good they've become staged as plays. And he invited me along because I was reviewing one of these plays for the Brighton Argus. He invited me along to a champagne reception at the interval. And I got him to one side and I said, well, this play is very intriguing, Peter, but I mean, it was about a situation where Guy was getting married, and on his stag night, his friends decided to play this awful prank on him, as they do on people with stag nights, and they buried him alive with the intention of going back to the coffin in which they put a breathing apparatus and rescuing him after a certain amount of time, 3 or 4 hours perhaps, or even more, I can't remember. And there was a line in it where the people who wanted him dead were saying our plans work perfectly. And I said to him, it can't be a plan that's worked perfectly, Peter, with all due respect, because you have these 4 friends of his, and when they're driving back in their car, meeting their death in a terrible accident with a lorry. So it can't be a plan. You could never have dreamed up. They could never have dreamed up a plan like that. It was just a complete accident. And he said, you know, Tony, I write so many of these crime thrillers, I can't even remember the plots myself. So he evaded answering the question. But don't get me wrong, I think Peter James is a very, very talented writer. But I just think that it's like these programs on television where they're churning out Midsummer Murders with tight deadlines. They're not doing the sort of research that we've talked about previously. And so there are instances where some of these books and TV programs are just not right. And when I spoke to these detective inspectors from the Met Police who advised me on police procedures for my 2 crime thrillers, they both of them made the point that lots of the television programs are completely far-fetched and don't adhere to police procedures. Gave me examples of them. And of course, the thing is that even the most fantastic television programs like Line of Duty, which I and lots of people love, are so completely far-fetched. I mean, are we really to believe that the police forces are corrupt as dear old Line of Duty would have us believe? But they're completely compelling stories, and as long as we accept that they are stories and they're not necessarily a true reflection on the police, then that's great.
Jason Kelly asks, have you ever been tempted to write a novel with John Newton?
Well, no, not. I haven't known him that long, really, and I haven't so far. And I don't suppose I ever will after finding out that he took a year on research and 6 months to write a chapter, which he then ditched. I mean, don't get me wrong, he writes some fantastic stuff. And his assassination diaries are unique and very gripping and compelling. But I don't think even me, who believes in doing research, could bear to do 6 months of research in a chapter and then be so much of a perfectionist that I ditched the chapter.
What about Heather? Would you write with Heather?
Yeah, well, she and I have come up with ideas for each other. Like I said, she came up with the first idea for Secret Potion, and I've helped by suggesting certain things to her. Our Mousy books were basically her ideas about a delightful little lady mouse. Then she came up with a giant sticker monster and other children's stories, and this giant sticker monster was completely her idea about this monster who went around getting his kicks by sticking stickers on children's heads or dogs' faces and stopping them being a complete nuisance. But then when Santa Claus had a problem and lost all his wrappings and labels, Giant Sticker Monster had the chance to become a hero. So we haven't written those together, but I have helped her by editing them, and I edited Purple Mist for her, or did copy editing for her, and also suggested how she could have extra chapters. So we do help each other.
Sam asks as well if there's any advice you have for people writing their debut.
Oh, what, their first novel?
Mm.
Yeah, well, I think it's very important that they do research, as we've already said, and that they don't get too carried away and try in these days of self-publishing to get it published too quickly. It's very easy to go and make that mistake, and then only realize in hindsight that there's reasonable number of literals that you've missed. There's repetition you missed. There's things that you would have done differently. So if you can just hold back your enthusiasm, and instead of rushing off to get self-published, you read it 3 or 4 more times, and you particularly get friends. If you can't afford to get someone to edit it for you, you get friends who are prepared to read it through and tell you things. I mean, the thing that helps us in particular with getting other people to read it is that if we just rely on ourselves and we read it through ourselves, our brain goes and turns off on certain words, like, for example, the word where and were without the H in it. If you meant to write where and you've actually typed were, when you read it through again, because your brain is telling you that it is where, that's the word you meant to put, you're fooled into missing it a second time or even a third time. So it is essential to get other people to read through, and of course to give you some feedback. I mean, in my last book, I got other people, Tamara McKinley, for example, who's a best-selling author. She's also patron of Anderida Writers, of which I'm chairman. So I didn't say to myself, I'm a former journalist and I'm a former Sky Television exec, so I know what I'm doing. No, I was quite happy to ask her advice on the first few chapters. And she pointed out a couple of things to me that I had taken for granted. And John Newton, when it came to points of view, although I've always been so completely obsessed with points of view, he realised and pointed out that I hadn't quite developed points of view as much as I might have done in some of these chapters. So I went back and did that again. And I'm sure there's fellow members who've done the same thing. So people who are starting off afresh mustn't be deterred if somebody gives them some advice, and well-meaning advice, and that advice turns out to be good advice. They mustn't think, oh, I've got this all wrong. They must be encouraged. Also, of course, the basics is to get something down, isn't it? It doesn't matter in these days when we've got computers if what you put down isn't as good as you want it to be. Once you've made a start, then that's great. I mean, there are people who are writing for the first time who go and look at a blank screen and get very frustrated. But when I've run creative writing classes and we've done flash fiction, or we've given people an exercise that they've got to write so many words in 10 minutes, if you can force yourself to write X number of words in 10 minutes, even though you might not be very happy with what you've written, if you can get that down on a laptop, you can always change it and develop it and get ideas and inspiration from it.
Is there anything you wouldn't write about?
I don't. Some of the things in Line of Duty, although I love the program, I wouldn't write about it. When Keeley Hawes was playing the detective who they reckon had killed her colleague or was responsible for the death of her colleagues, and in the prison they these prison officers made out they were going to make her a cup of tea, and then poured boiling water over her hands and scalded them so severely that she had to have extensive treatment on them. I couldn't write that. I don't think I could write that sort of stuff. I don't really like torture very much. And although in Triple T's the sex scenes, there's limits to them, and mainly a lot of the time they're in the words used and the innuendo, rather than blatant rampant sex. Although there is sex in it, I suppose Triple T's is 80% crime thriller and 20% sexual content.
How long did it take you to choose your character names?
Well, I suppose some of them I've given nicknames to, which I hopefully are amusing. Others I've tried to make them apply to the character, like Detective Chief Inspector Harvey Livermore. Harvey Livermore seems to be not such an uncommon name that it hits you between the eyes, but it's not a common name either, and I think it's appropriate for a detective chief inspector to have that sort of name. There are nicknames that people can have which are quite funny and are pretty obvious to what they are. But basically, I've always tried to make Christian names with a different letter. So I wouldn't have a Lindsay and a Linda. I wouldn't have a Michael and a Martin. I just think that those characters the reader can get mixed up. So I distinguish between the names.
Yeah, we've had other authors who said very similar. Do you decide your titles and covers yourself?
Sorry?
Do you decide on your titles and your cover yourself?
I decide on the titles myself, and the covers I've had designed, but I've come up with the ideas of where I want things. The one that was completely probably out of my hands was this secret potion, where the designer has put this wizard in the foreground, put this world's worst monster. You probably can't see it on here, but there is a picture of the world's worst monster there, and the main picture is of the girl Jodie Richards. So this was designed for me. I just gave them the basic concept of what I want, and they did the rest. With Triple T's, I actually wanted a picture of a lady wearing an evening dress. We all know these dresses like in James Bond, where one of the ladies wears an evening dress that splits up to the thigh, and that's what I wanted. Unfortunately, Exiblis Publishing, despite the fact that they're a really big publisher, in all their pictures, they only had one, and it was too. It wasn't clear enough, according to the artist who was going to do this design for me. Now, there is a scene in the book where the woman is in her underwear when this guy comes into her flat, and she does have occasion to get a gun. So I went with the picture that they had of a woman in her underwear, and we managed to put a gun in her hand. I think possibly that didn't do me any favors, because it looks as if it's too sexy a book probably to readers. Maybe that isn't the best cover I could have chosen. On the other hand, who knows? I don't know. What do you think, Caroline? Do you think it's a cover that will put women off, or what?
I know, I think it stands out. It's a bit different from the usual.
Yeah, well, I thought so. The one with My Life with the Stars, this is when I was with Aaron Bow, and in the first edition, these pictures of George Best and Des O'Connor and Frank Bruno, these starbursts, didn't appear. And my wife, Heather, was very upset because my hand was on Aaron Bow's thigh, and she thought that was a bit off. So when the second edition came out, I got the designer to put a starburst of George Best over my hand, another one of Des O'Connor, and another one of Frank Bruno. So yeah, that's that one. Stitch Up. I was going to come up with my idea that this is the one where the person who did the formatting came up with this picture from Splash, Unsplash, is it called? Very good site where you can get pictures free as long as you give the photographer and the website a written credit. And I was going to have a guy behind bars holding his hands on the bars. Unfortunately, Denton Kershaw, who served some time behind bars on crimes that you've got to work out whether he did or didn't commit. Is he a double murderer when his two ex-girlfriends are killed? Does that make him a double killer? Does it make him cursed by bad luck? Or does it mean he's been stitched up? But my idea was to have him behind bars. The only pictures that I could come across behind bars were pictures of people who looked of a different nationality than my English guy. So the person who did the formatting, Dinny Van Cleef, she found this picture, which I'd already seen and sort of rejected, although I left it as a possible, because this is a picture of a prison corridor. But I didn't realize whether people looking at it, because as you know, as we all know, people only look at these covers for a few seconds before they either decide they're going to buy the book or put it on the disused pile. It didn't necessarily strike me as a prison, and I thought, well, if it is looking like a prison, are people going to think that the whole book is based in a prison when it's not? So I did give a lot of thought to this one. The other thing is that one of these former policemen scoffed at this and said, well, that's Alcatraz, Tony. You want an English prison, get an English prison. But the pictures of English prisons were pretty pathetic in my mind, because they looked like pictures taken by an estate agent. They didn't have any atmosphere like this one does. So I asked loads of people what they thought, and gave them three options of three different front covers, and that was the one that came up the most popular with would-be readers. So in that case, I did ask views of a lot of other people.
Jason wonders what's next from you. What are you working on now?
I'm not at the moment. I'm going to edit my wife's next book, which is going to be a book of short stories, and she's also got poems that she's written. So I'm going to edit that for her. Take a break from that. I may or may not do some more talks when we can get back to social networking. I mean, My Life with the Stars, I don't know whether I mentioned to you, there's lots of humour in these books, as well as revelations and thrills and spills. And some of the humour in My Life with the Stars, for example, is a chapter about Eric Morecambe. And Des O'Connor said to me, because I met Des, and he revealed that all these put downs he's had with Eric Morecambe, probably the worst was when he proudly told Eric he'd just done a one-man show. And Eric said, well, never mind, perhaps two will turn up next time. And Eric Morecambe also used to play tricks on other people as well. And once Fiona, who became Roy Castle's wife, Fiona Castle, as she was then a single person, she was a dancer in a show which starred Morecambe and Wise, and this was in Coventry. And she made the mistake, or perhaps it wasn't a mistake as it turned out, by telling Eric that she'd love to meet Roy Castle. And eventually he arranged to do it. And she was painfully shy, Fiona. And funnily enough, Roy Castle, although he was a famous entertainer, he was quite a shy person. And Eric Morecambe embarrassed them both by saying, this is Fiona, she's always wanted to meet you, she's madly in love with you. So that embarrassed her beyond belief. And then when she found out how Eric had set it up, he had apparently said to Roy Castle, can you meet this girl who wants to be introduced to you, called Fiona? She's got pigtails and braces. She's a pathetic little thing, but be kind to her. And despite all this, they got married within a year. So Eric Morecambe was a bit of a matchmaker. So I could go around telling some of these anecdotes at speeches and at people's dinners or social functions, and take a few books along, which proved quite popular at Women's Institute meetings, etc. But to answer your question in a long-winded way, I haven't got any plans to write anything at the moment.
We are really near the end of our time, Tony. In fact, Sam's just put a little message on that says, fab interview, thanks. Kaz said you were lovely, and she's right, Tony.
Oh, who said that?
Sam.
What a wonderful person. And of course, you're a wonderful person as well. No, you are. I mean, you've done wonders for a lot. I'm sure you haven't just done it for me. You've done it for loads of people. And David and her, their encouragement means a lot to people, because even when loads of us have written books, we're still not necessarily full of confidence. And you helped us so much. So thank you very much.
Well, finish us off by holding up your books and showing us them off one last time.
Well, there's the stitch up, and there's the review by Stuart Pink of the Sun newspaper, saying riveting plot and electrifying double twist. There's going from one genre to the other, My Life with the Stars. If you do get this one, get the one that says Sizzling Secrets Spilled, because it's the second edition. It's got more chapters in it.
Really good anecdote about Carly Simon in it as well.
Oh yes, Carly Simon liking her bottom smacked. You like that, didn't you? I don't know whether we've got time, but the anecdote about that is that Carly Simon, like lots of famous people, suffer from stage fright. I mean, Sir Laurence Olivier, I point out how he suffered from stage fright, and of course Stephen Fry and other people. And her form of stage fright, she decided to prick her fingers, her hands with needles, and then she found that having her bottom smacked also relieved the tension. So she'd get the orchestra just before they went on stage to spank her bottom. Unfortunately, in one show, the curtain went up prematurely and it was in mid-spank. So that was very embarrassing. And then the last one is Jodie Richards' The Secret Potion. And if you're interested, Twisting the Towers, this is saying we're not dead yet writers, and it's saying 16 superb short stories, a mixture of humour, thrills and sexual intrigue, provide twists galore. So I think it's imperative, in my view, it's not in every book, of course, but I think it's very helpful if you have a twist in your tale somewhere.
Tony, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on.
Thank you very much. Pleasure talking to you.
You're going to have to come back at some point because we could talk.
Thank you very much. Thank you.